In the grand theater of American history, few names resonate with such raw magnitude as John D. Rockefeller. Not just a man, a force. Not just a businessman, a builder of Dominion God at his peak. Rockefeller controlled nearly 90% of the oil in the United States. Adjusted for inflation, he was worth over $400 billion, more than Bezos, Musk, and Gates combined. A steel of the railroads bent for him. The heartbeat of industry pulsed at his command. Banks waited. Presidents hesitated. Even the law, at times, seemed to whisper in his direction rather than dare raise its voice. So the question must be asked, how? How does one man rise so far above the noise of competition, so far beyond the boundaries of ordinary ambition, that he becomes a living empire? The answer is not luck, not fate, not inheritance. It is principle, not the kind printed in books and forgotten in classrooms. No, these were forged like steel in the furnace of discipline, pressed into the bedrock of his identity, and followed with a fanatic resolve. Rockefeller's life was not a gamble. It was an equation, a system, a philosophy of control in a world obsessed with chaos. He didn't need to shout. He didn't need to show his teeth. He built cathedrals of wealth in silence, while others fought in the mud for scraps of success. And deep inside the engine of that empire were 3 rules. Not 5, not 10, 3 simple, immutable, unbreakable. He never spoke of them plainly. He lived them. And that's how you knew they were real. They weren't decoration. They were the architecture. But before we unveil them, you must understand the storm he mastered. Because if you want to build what he built, you must be prepared to face what he faced. The America of Rockefeller's youth was not paved in gold. It was paved in fire. A civil war had torn the nation's soul. Corruption slithered through politics. The rich were predators, the poor prey. Oil was not yet an industry. It was chaos in a barrel. Wildcatters dug like madmen. Refineries exploded. Fortunes rose and vanished in the span of weeks. Into this brutal world walked a young John D. Rockefeller, son of a conman. His father was known as Devil Bill, a snake oil salesman who vanished for months, lied for a living, and taught young John one lesson: trust no one. But Rockefeller would not become like his father. He didn't want tricks. He wanted order. He wanted control. He wanted permanence. He began with books, ledgers, discipline. At 16, he became an assistant bookkeeper. He worked with a precision that made others look drunk, while his peers chased. The rush of easy money, Rockefeller calculated, waited, and moved only when he saw the advantage. It wasn't charisma that made him rise. It was consistency. He didn't ride waves. He built docks. And from the moment he touched oil, he saw what no one else could. Not just black liquid. Not just profit. He saw power, if it could be disciplined. So he did the impossible. He brought order to oil. He standardized quality, slashed waste, negotiated railroad rates with the cold logic of a machine. Competitors called him ruthless, tyrannical. Some called him the devil. But Rockefeller didn't flinch, because he understood something that others did not. The man who wins is not the man who fights hardest. It is the man who controls himself the longest. And this was the first rule. Rule number 1, master stability before you seek power. The world worships aggression. Strike first, move fast, break things. But Rockefeller saw the flaw. Movement without mastery is suicide. He didn't build an empire by running toward opportunity. He built it by standing still with conviction. In his own words, do not many of us who fail to achieve big things fail because we lack concentration, the art of concentrating the mind on the thing to be done at the proper time and to the exclusion of everything else? He eliminated distractions with religious discipline. No alcohol, no gambling, no emotional outbursts. He was not loud. He was not erratic. He was a stone wall, unmoved by panic, unmoved by trend. He dressed in plain suits while others flaunted their wealth. He walked, not ran. He read, not speculated. Because Rockefeller understood, before you control a company, before you control a market, you must control yourself. Stability is the throne from which power is ruled. If your moods can be swayed by failure, if your judgment is rattled by fear, if your strategy dies at the first sign of pain, then you are not a builder. You are just a gambler with a fancy dream. Rockefeller was the opposite. He could wait years for a deal to ripen. He didn't chase, he engineered. And that's why, when panic struck the markets, when banks collapsed, when men jumped from windows in despair, Rockefeller did not tremble. He expanded. In 1873, during one of the worst financial crises in U.S. history, he bought out dozens of failing oil refineries. While others saw disaster, he saw leverage. Because he had cash, because he had calm, because he had stability. That was his first rule, the one that underpinned all others. Stability first, power second. But even with stability, even with control, an empire requires more than self-discipline. It requires vision. A kind of vision that burns through decades. One that doesn't just respond to the world, but reshapes it. And that's where we begin to glimpse the second rule. The rule that turned Standard Oil from a company into a nation within a nation. Most men see what is in front of them. John D. Rockefeller saw what was behind the horizon, while others played checkers on the board of business. He played chess on the board of time. And not just 5 moves ahead, 50, 100, an entire lifetime ahead. He understood that vision isn't a dream, it's a strategy with patience. A vision is not just seeing a future, it's enduring the present until that future arrives. So he didn't compete in the present. He prepared for the future. That's why he built pipelines when everyone else was relying on railroads. He saw that dependence on the rail barons was a weakness, so he created his own transportation network. He turned his company into its own ecosystem. Complete, autonomous, untouchable. He built refineries, warehouses, transportation, and distribution into one singular machine. Others called it a monopoly. He called it efficiency. Because Rockefeller was not content to compete. He was here to dominate, but not through brute force, through design. Because when your system is designed correctly, you don't have to fight. Your enemies exhaust themselves against the walls you built 20 years before they even knew you were a threat. And that brings us to the second rule, the rule that separates builders from drifters, kings from beggars. Rule number 2, build systems, not moments. Moments are addictive. Moments are dramatic. Moments are seductive. But moments are also fleeting. Not a windfall of money, a viral success, a quick acquisition. These things feel like power, but they're smoke. Because when the moment passes, what remains? Rockefeller built something that remained. A machine that operated, whether he was awake or asleep. A system that turned oil into dominance and turned dominance into wealth. He didn't celebrate short-term wins. He eliminated them. He believed in reinvestment, not reward. He lived modestly. He saved relentlessly. He reinvested 80% of profits directly back into the business. Because to him, every dollar was a brick in the fortress of long-term control. While others bought mansions, he bought silence from his competitors. While others hosted parties, he bought refineries. This is why Standard Oil became more than a company. It became inevitable. His systems were built on simplicity, but executed with obsession. Every inch of the process, from drilling to refining to shipping, was streamlined, optimized, and perfected. No waste, no noise, no weakness. And when the storms came, and they always come, Rockefeller didn't break. His systems absorbed the shock, adapted, endured, because systems do what emotions cannot. They do not panic. They do not forget. They do not tire. Rockefeller's system was not just industrial, it was psychological. He structured his mind the same way he structured his empire. He removed emotional variables. He trusted processes, not impulses. He let logic lead and let discipline follow through, because he knew the man who does not systematize his actions will forever be at the mercy of his moods. And it was that mindset, that automation of excellence, that allowed him to outlast every challenge. Competitors tried to outmaneuver him. Regulators tried to dissolve him. Journalists tried to vilify him. But his systems were deeper than anyone could see, more resilient than they could break, more intentional than they could comprehend. And, through all of it, the lawsuits, the public outrage, the endless scrutiny, Rockefeller never wavered. Why? Because his system was not built to impress, it was built to survive. And survival leads to supremacy, but there was still one more rule. One final piece of the architecture. The rule that underpinned all others. The rule that no empire can endure without, because even with discipline, even with systems, there is one element more powerful than strategy, more decisive than capital, more lethal than competition. It is the one thing most men never master, the final gatekeeper of all lasting success: control over emotion. Because in war, in business, in the pursuit of greatness, emotion is the most seductive saboteur. It flatters you when you rise. It betrays you when you fall. And if you do not master it, it owns you. To control emotion is to control the tempo of life itself. And Rockefeller was a master conductor. Where others boiled, he remained still. Where others panicked, he paused. Where others lashed out in fear, he tightened his grip on clarity. His face rarely betrayed what he was thinking. His voice never rose in anger. His hand never shook, not in deals, not in defeats. He was once asked if he ever got angry. He replied calmly, "I've learned to swallow it whole." Because he knew emotion is the enemy of empire. You cannot negotiate from a place of rage. You cannot plan from a place of fear. You cannot lead from a place of ego. And so, John D. Rockefeller forged an interior fortress, not of steel, not of stone, but of stillness, a mind that refused to tremble, a heart that refused to rush, a soul that refused to react. That was the final rule, the crown jewel of his code. Rule number 3. Never let emotion govern your decisions. You cannot build something permanent if you are ruled by something temporary. And every emotion, everyone, is temporary. Panic is a moment. Fear is a flash. Excitement is a rush. But decisions made in those moments have permanent consequences. Rockefeller had seen too many men rise in glory and fall in disgrace, not because they lacked intelligence, but because they lacked restraint. They bet too big when they felt invincible. They sold too soon when they felt afraid. They exploded in anger. They drowned in greed. They chased shadows. He chose another way. He responded, never reacted. He waited, calculated. He let the storm pass. And when the battlefield cleared, he was still standing. That is the power of emotional control. Not suppression, domination. He didn't hide from feeling. He simply refused to let it steer the ship. When journalists called him a monster, he didn't fire back. When competitors accused him of corruption, he didn't justify. When the government tried to dismantle Standard Oil, he didn't cry foul. He adapted. He smiled. And then he built again, Because Rockefeller was not seeking applause. He was seeking permanence. His empire was not made of headlines. It was made of decisions, one after another, made without emotional interference. This made him dangerous, because nothing is more powerful than a man who cannot be provoked, and that is why his enemies fear him. Not because he was aggressive, but because he was unshakable. You see, power without emotion is not cruelty. It is clarity. It is the ability to act without noise, to move without hesitation, to execute without vanity. That's how empires are, forged in the fire of restraint. And so, when Standard Oil was broken apart in 1911 by the Supreme Court, split into 34 separate companies, many expected Rockefeller to fall, but he didn't single quotes T.Y. because the structure was only the visible part. The real empire was invisible. It was inside him. It was inside the rules. Those 34 companies became the seeds of modern giants: Exxon, Mobil, Chevron, Amoco, all traces of the same DNA. Rockefeller? He became even richer, because a man who follows principles instead of panic always wins in the end. So now we arrive at the edge of the mirror. You've heard the rules, not shouted, not sold, lived. Stability before power. Systems, not moments, emotionless execution. These are not theories. These are not tactics. They are the bones beneath the skin of the richest man in modern history. But the question is no longer about him. The question is you. Will you drift like the others? Impulsive, reactive, burning bright, and dying young? Or will you build like Rockefeller, with silence, with discipline, with obsession? Because empires are not born. They are forged, one unbreakable rule at a time. Most people never build anything that lasts, because they're too addicted to the temporary. They chase applause instead of legacy. They want comfort now instead of power later. They want victory without structure, wealth without sacrifice, respect without discipline. But Rockefeller knew the world doesn't give you what you want. It gives you what you're structured to withstand. So, while the world spun faster with noise and chaos, he moved slower with deliberation. He was not in a rush. He was inevitable, because he didn't need to win every day. He just needed to never break. He just needed to show up one decision, stronger than yesterday, one layer deeper into the system, 1 degree calmer than the man next to him. He didn't just play the game. He changed it. And every time someone said, "That's impossible," Rockefeller replied with action. Silent, calculated, relentless. That is what people forget. That the game of wealth is not played on stages. It is played in solitude. In silence. In the invisible discipline, no one applauds. While others gorged on praise, he fasted in focus. While others raced for popularity, he studied power. While others boasted of wins, he built fortresses from loss. You want to know what really made him untouchable? It wasn't oil. It wasn't even money. It was this. He made his entire life a monument to self-control. No indulgence could tempt him off path. No insult could drag him into petty battle. No crisis could break his poise. That is the kind of man who builds a dynasty. That is the kind of man who, even when broken apart by the full force of the federal government, somehow ends up more powerful than before. Because Rockefeller wasn't just rich. He was structured. His empire wasn't steel and oil. It was principle and precision. Every refinery he built, every pipeline he laid, every merger he signed, they weren't just business moves. They were expressions of a deeper code. A code you now hold in your hands. So let's bring it together. Not as a summary, but as a summoning. Let these rules burn into your bloodstream. Rule 1. Stability before power. Don't reach for power if you're not built to carry it. Structure your mind before you scale your vision. Rule 2. Build systems. Not moments. Don't seek flashes of victory. Build mechanisms that operate with or without you. Systems are immortality in motion. Rule 3. Never let emotion govern your decisions. Master your reactions. Dominate your impulses. Be the calmest man in every room, and you will be the most powerful. These are not optional. These are not philosophies. For the good times, these are rules of war, rules of legacy, rules of empire. Break them, and you dissolve into the crowd. Follow them, and you become unshakable, just like the man who turned black sludge into gold, who turned a volatile, ruthless industry into an engine of unrelenting efficiency, who outlived his critics, outperformed his peers, and outlasted every attempt to erase him. John D. Rockefeller didn't just become the richest man of his time. He became the most principled, because anyone can make money, but only the few, only the disciplined, only the obsessed, only the ones who never break their rules can. Build something eternal. So now the world turns to you. What will you build? And more importantly, what will you refuse to break?